our second major government macroeconomic objective is to achieve price stability. Now, when I say price stability, generally we're always thinking price के rise को हमने रोकना है. But that's not what price stability means. Price stability means that you don't want the prices to go up too fast, you don't want it to fall too fast. दोनों तरफ होती है price stability. Do you understand that? It's about not letting the prices go up or letting it go down. You want to have a stability in the market. Okay? So, in order to do that, first, let's just try and understand. When I say price stability, I mean that the general price levels of all goods and services should remain stable. Not just a few, not just a few important ones, but generally all goods and services की prices should remain stable. अगर किसी हाइप वगैरह की वजह से किसी पर्टिकुलर गुड की प्राइस ऊपर जा रही है किसी एक आध की, तो दैट्स नॉट अ बिग प्रॉब्लम. द बिग प्रॉब्लम इज व्हेन एवरीथिंग स्टार्ट्स टू बिकम मोर एक्सपेंसिव एंड स्टफ. तो जहाँ तक प्राइस स्टेबिलिटी की बात है, वी से दैट व्हेन prices are stable, it is easier for people, yani individuals या households, they're all correct for words. Households actually takes everyone into account, not just individuals but collectively as family. Businesses and even government to make economic decisions, like how much salary to get, how much salary to pay, what goods to buy. Should we buy a car right now or not? Should we invest in the business right now? Should we get a machine? From government's point of view, should we start making bridges and stuff? So these kind of economic decisions from each individual, they will be relative in this situation. So price stability is important. If there is too much, so I can mention it over here. For household, it's about their decision to buy durable goods like cars, houses, essentials. For businesses, it would be about investment. Should we make investment? Should we buy machines? And for government, it would be like infrastructure spending and stuff like that. Should we do it? Should we not do it? Now, when we talk about prices, and especially prices going up, every government in the world calculates inflation. That's one of their major economic indicator that they use as to how the government is performing or how the economy is performing. So one of the ways to measure inflation is through called CPI or RPI. CPI basically stands for Consumer Price Index. When we'll talk about inflation, then we're going to actually discuss as to how this is actually calculated. There's a mathematical procedure to it with certain steps. But basically, just remember that inflation means generally prices are going up, not just one good or two good. तो उसको हम CPI या RPI, पाकिस्तान में we use SPI, Sensitive Price Index also, जिसमें हम certain goods and services को लेते हैं, and we measure inflation through this. Now government inflation rate को बहुत closely monitor करती है, because people get upset when prices go too high, and then you see it on news media, and then the government looks bad as a result of that. So अब inflation ठीक है, हो रही है, but is it a good thing or a bad thing? That's up to debate. Now just remember, if you have a slow and steady inflation, like for example, if you have like a 2% or a 3% inflation, that's very mild. You actually can call it mild or creeping. That's a very low rate of inflation rate. Now we say that a slow and steady inflation rate of 2 or 3%, it's actually good for economy. So inflation is actually good, is what I'm saying. But a very slow rate of inflation is good, because just think it from you as a consumer point of view. If a good is worth 1000 rupee and there is 2% inflation, and at the end of the year it becomes 1020 rupees, would it make any difference to you as a consumer if it goes from 1000 to 1020? So we're saying it's actually good for economy, because consumers don't mind and producers are encouraged to produce more. So that's a good thing. A mild inflation is not bad. So whenever the discussion is about inflation is bad, you say, hold on, it depends. If it's a slow, steady rate, it's not so bad. However, the problem begins when the inflation rate is really high. High and increasing inflation. Well, when this is the case, from the consumer's point of view, consumers do not like this and responds by more savings and less consumption to be able to afford in future. And so as a result, producers see fall in demand, and that's not a good thing, because even though they would like to produce more, when it doesn't get sell, so obviously for them that's a discouraging thing. Unpredictable inflation rate makes it difficult for government and businesses to plan. It makes it difficult for them to plan ahead कि क्या करना है for businesses. So for government, the tax collection that they are getting may not be sufficient when they spend on goods and services. So government को जो tax collections मिल रही हैं, obviously those tax collections are not sufficient. वो जब खर्च करने जाते हैं तो they realize that they're not able to get as much as they want out of it. On the other hand, for the business, obviously there are certain problems. For businesses, the problem is about if they sell on credit and the money they get later loses its purchasing power. Right? So for business, higher prices means less competitiveness in the international market, and that causes exports to fall. In fact, it causes import to rise also. So for government, that's a problem. So I'll put that in the government's problem situation, that when imports rise because of high domestic prices, then it's bad for the balance of payment, and we'll talk about balance of payment later. Now that we have established that inflation, especially high and increasing inflation, is bad for economy and decision making and planning of governments and businesses, we want to see how governments can achieve price stability. What do they have? So in order to achieve price stability, let's say one method we have is like government comes in and takes direct control of prices. Okay, they intervene in the market, and basically the way they achieve it is a direct control of prices. We say it can be achieved through government's minimum and maximum price legislations. Now, we will talk about this minimum and maximum price legislations a little in the future, but just to give you an idea, basically minimum price legislation government जब लगाती है तो इसका मतलब है कि government makes it illegal to sell a good below a set price. फॉर एग्जाम्पल गवर्नमेंट कम्स इन और बोलती है सिगरेट का पैकेट मार्केट के अंदर 200 रुपये पर पैकेट बिक रहा है. दैट्स नॉट गुड, दैट्स हार्मफुल फॉर द पीपल हु आर स्मोकिंग इट एंड फॉर द पीपल अराउंड देम, एंड इट्स नॉट अ नाइस गुड टू कंज्यूम, इट्स अ demerit. We are placing a minimum price of 400 on it. अब मार्केट्स में तो इसका रेट 200 है. People are buying at 200, producers are selling at 200, लेकिन now you are forced to sell it at 400. Naturally, people will be discouraged and they will consume less at that price. Does that make sense? और 400 से कम कर भी नहीं सकते आप. So, द थिंग इज़ कि जब आप मिनिमम प्राइस ऐसे गुड्स पे लगाते हो, डीमेरिट गुड्स यूजुअली इनइलास्टिक होते हैं. सिगरेट्स, अल्कोहल, वेपन, दे आर इनइलास्टिक. अब जब मैं इसकी प्राइस 200 से 400 पे लेके जाऊंगा, बिकॉज दे इनइलास्टिक, क्वांटिटी में कम रिडक्शन आएगा, नॉट एज मच, लेकिन रिमेंबर इन द शॉर्ट रन इज गोइंग टू हैव अ स्मॉलर इम्पैक्ट. बिकॉज कंज्यूमर्स इन द लॉन्ग रन विल सी 200 का 400 पे चला गया है, दे विल स्टार्ट चेंजिंग देयर हैबिट्स, दे विल लुक फॉर अदर ऑल्टरनेटिव्स, because eventually it will hurt their pockets. So in the long run they will respond and make adjustments accordingly. Maybe in the short run they might not. On the other hand, government can even impose a maximum price. Usually maximum price essential goods पे लगती है. इसका क्या मतलब है कि government makes it illegal producers to sell it above a set price. So in unit number 2 you have an entire explanation of how minimum and maximum works. You can go there and you can check. तो ये तो एक हमारी बात हो गई. Now that the government steps in and controls the prices themselves, we say as a result the market forces are being controlled, and that's a problem, okay? Because the price system is no longer operational. Things are not happening on the basis of demand and supply. So therefore, it worsens the efficient system of price signaling to consumers and producers. When we say another problem that it is doing is that by you suggesting the prices and all, we say there might be a conflict that may arise between the government and the businesses. Okay, and that can create obviously problems amongst them. Like for example, I gave you an example of cigarettes. 200 से 400 पे ले गए. Cigarette producers are obviously going to get upset about this. They're going to complain to the government that, you know, we will have to fire people and people will get unemployed. Trade unions might get upset. तो इस किस्म के conflicts might arise as a result of government directly coming into this. Now, the next policy, so the second policy the government has to stabilize inflation is called fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, ये बहुत मेजर पॉलिसी है. फिजिकल एंड मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी, ये गवर्नमेंट की दो मेजर पॉलिसीज़ हैं. ये सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के अंडर आती है. ओके, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट हैज़ कंट्रोल ओवर इट, and it has two things. Number one, it has the government spending. Number one, it has government spending. So, to control inflation, government should reduce spending on goods and services. For example, government कम गाड़ियाँ खरीदो, करोला, हाइलक्सेस और ये पुलिस के लिए या गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल्स के लिए, उससे गाड़ियों की डिमांड गिरेगी, रेट्स आएंगे, नीचे आएंगे. कम इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट वगैरह के लिए स्टील और सीमेंट की डिमांड करें तो उससे स्टील और सीमेंट की डिमांड भी नीचे आएगी. और भी गवर्नमेंट तो हर चीज़ प्रिटी मच खरीदती है, मोबाइल फ़ोन, लैपटॉप्स, कंप्यूटर इक्विपमेंट्स, you know tea, biscuits for the government officials and stuff, table, furniture, pankhe, electronics, so much stuff government purchases it. We want the government to reduce its expenditure in order to control inflation. Number two policy we have in the fiscal policy is taxes. तो गवर्नमेंट को अगर कंज्यूमर की स्पेंडिंग भी कम करने की ज़रूरत है, डिमांड कम करने की ज़रूरत है, तो टू कंट्रोल इन्फ्लेशन government will raise taxes. This will cause incomes to fall and therefore demand for goods and services will fall और इन्फ्लेशन में कंट्रोल आ जाएगा. Consumers will buy less because they can afford to buy less. गवर्नमेंट ने एक बड़ा चंक ले लिया है थ्रू टैक्सेस फ्रॉम दैम, और ये भी डायरेक्ट टैक्सेस है क्योंकि इनकम के ऊपर अप्लाई हो रहा है. दिस विल अगेन वी विल स्टडी इन द टैक्सेस कमिंग लेटर. तो गवर्नमेंट की दो पॉलिसीज़ हैं, इन्फ्लेशन को कंट्रोल कम करना है तो फिस्कल पॉलिसी यूज़ करेंगे. ये फिस्कल पॉलिसी टू कंट्रोल इन्फ्लेशन, देयर इज़ एक्चुअली अ नेम फॉर इट, कि जब आप गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग को कम करना चाहते हो और टैक्सेस को बढ़ाना चाहते हो, देयर इज़ अ स्पेसिफिक नेम फॉर इट एंड इट इज़ कॉल्ड कॉन्ट्रैक्शनरी फिस्कल पॉलिसी. कॉन्ट्रैक्शनरी फिस्कल पॉलिसी, कॉन्ट्रैक्शन का मतलब क्या है? टू रिड्यूस समथिंग. रिड्यूस व्हाट? डिमांड. रिडक्शन ऑफ डिमांड विल कॉज प्राइसेस टू गो डाउन. और फिस्कल पॉलिसी में गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग और टैक्सेस ये सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के कंट्रोल में होती है. सो आवर थर्ड पॉलिसी इज कॉल्ड ए मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. And again, this one you need to know. You can't not no and go. Ab fiscal policy was under the control of the central government. Monetary policy is controlled by the central bank, the state bank of the country. So the central bank has control over this policy, and it has two things. It also has two things. Number one, it has the quantity of money supply. क्वांटिटी ऑफ मनी सप्लाई का मतलब ये है कि इकोनॉमी में कितना पैसा सर्कुलेशन में घूम रहा है, कितने नोट्स, कितने बैंक डिपॉजिट्स, कितने कॉइन्स इकोनॉमी में सर्कुलेट कर रहे हैं, जो सेंट्रल बैंक प्रिंट करके इंक्रीज भी कर सकता है और डिक्रीज भी कर सकता है. ठीक है. यूजुअली वी से द मोर मनी देयर इज इन द इकोनॉमी, द मोर स्पेंडिंग विल हैपन. द लेसर द मनी, द लेसर द स्पेंडिंग. तो क्वांटिटी ऑफ मनी सप्लाई से ऑब्वियसली आप डिमांड को इम्पैक्ट कर सकते हो. सो आई विल राइट दैट टू कंट्रोल इन्फ्लेशन, central bank can reduce the amount of money in circulation by making less credit when I say I mean loan, available to consumers and producers, and this will reduce demand for goods and services. ये तो एक तरीका हो गया. दिस इज अगेन योर मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी का हिस्सा. पहला हिस्सा मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी का है क्वांटिटी ऑफ मनी सप्लाई, और दूसरा हिस्सा है इंटरेस्ट रेट. तो इफ वी वांट टू कंट्रोल inflation, then central bank can can increase the interest rate and this will increase the cost of borrowing and result in lower borrowing for consumption. The demand will fall. The demand for goods and services will fall.